The kid with the squad leader tabs looked the old man up and down like he was reading an expired coupon, then laughed loud enough for the whole firing line to hear, "Sir, with all due respect, iron sights on a modern carbine. That's like bringing a flip phone to a hostage negotiation. The battlefield moved on about 20 years ago." The old man didn't answer. He just adjusted the brim of his cap, the one with the faded gold anchor stitched above the bill, and looked down at the loner M4 on the bench. His hands were steady. Steadier than they had any right to be at 78. The instructor turned to his class of 18 students and grinned. "Gentlemen, we're about to watch a history lesson. If you believe respect is something you earn, not something you inherit, type the word honor in the comments right now, because what this young instructor was about to witness would change the way he taught for the rest of his career. His name was Raymond Kessler, and at 78 years old he still woke up every morning at 4:30, made black coffee in a stovetop percolator his wife had bought in 1974, and stood on the back porch of his little ranch house in Bastrop County watching the sun come up over the cedar breaks. He moved slower than he used to. There was a hitch in his right hip from a piece of shrapnel nobody had ever bothered to remove, and his left ear had been largely decorative since a mortar round at Khe-Sanh, but his eyes still tracked like they were wired to something older and more patient than a human nervous system. He drove a 1998 Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard and a faded Marine Corps sticker in the back window, and most mornings he wore the same thing: a clean white undershirt, a long-sleeve plaid button-down over it regardless of the heat, khaki pants, and a pair of Red Wing boots that had outlived 2 presidents. He did not own a cell phone. He did not use the internet. He had a landline with an answering machine that still recorded on a cassette tape, and the only voice on that tape for the last 11 years had been his daughter Linda calling every Sunday at 6. His wife Margaret had died in the spring of 2014, and he had not spoken her name out loud in public since the funeral. He carried her wedding ring on a thin steel chain underneath his undershirt, and sometimes in the evening, sitting alone at the kitchen table, he would press his hand flat against his chest and feel the shape of it through the fabric. That was how he prayed. The locals in Bastrop knew him as Mr. Ray, the quiet man who bought 24 eggs every Thursday at the feed store and tipped the waitress at the diner 20% on a $4 breakfast. What they did not know, what almost nobody in Bastrop knew, was that in a cedar chest at the foot of his bed there was a shadow box, and inside that shadow box were 3 bronze stars with V devices, a silver star, 2 purple hearts, and a navy cross that had been pinned to his chest personally in 1969 by a man who would later become the 38th Commandant of the Marine Corps. And the reason he had driven 2 hours north to a civilian carbine course that Saturday morning was not because he wanted to relearn a rifle he had been shooting since 1965. It was because his grandson Tyler, 19 years old and about to leave for Paris Island in 41 days, had asked him to come, and Raymond Kessler had never in his life told that boy no. The facility sat on a dusty parcel of scrubland about 40 miles east of Austin, bracketed on 3 sides by live oaks, and on the 4th by a county road that nobody drove on unless they had a reason. It advertised itself as a premium tactical training centre, and the signage out front was all black and orange with stylized silhouettes of men in plate carriers kneeling behind barricades. The parking lot was full of lifted trucks and compact SUVs, and the students milling around the check-in table were mostly men in their 30s and 40s, wearing brand new range belts and multicam ball caps that had never seen rain. Tyler had paid for the class himself, $850 out of the money he had been saving from his job at the tractor supply, and he had insisted on paying for his grandfather's slot too, even though Raymond had tried 3 separate times to press a folded check into his hand. The boy had grown up on stories his grandfather had refused to tell, which meant he'd grown up on the silences between them, and those silences had shaped him into a young man who stood very straight and said yes sir to waitresses. The lead instructor was a former contractor named Bryce Halloran, 25 years old, lean and tattooed, with a beard that had been sculpted into a geometric point, and a pair of $2,000 sunglasses pushed up on his forehead. He had done 1 4-year enlistment in the army as a cavalry scout, had deployed once to a quiet sector in eastern Afghanistan, and had spent the 6 years since turning that deployment into a personality. He had a YouTube channel with 211,000 subscribers. He was good on camera. He was good with his rifle too, genuinely good, in the way that a lot of talented young men are good at the thing they love, before life has ever really asked them a hard question. And as the students filed onto the covered firing line that Saturday morning, a and began unboxing their carbines. Bryce Halloran looked down the row and saw something he did not expect to see. He saw an old man in a flannel shirt with a Marine Corps ball cap standing next to a nervous-looking teenager, checking the chamber on a rental M4 with a practiced motion that Bryce did not immediately recognize, because it was older than he was. The morning block was supposed to be a diagnostic. Every student was expected to put 10 rounds into a 12-inch steel plate at 50 yards, standing unsupported inside of 40 seconds. It was not a hard drill. It was designed to give Bryce a baseline on each shooter so he could slot them into the appropriate coaching lane for the afternoon. The problem began when he walked down the line and reached Raymond's position. The old man had set up the loaner rifle on the bench in front of him, a standard flat-top M4 with a Trijicon red dot optic clamped to the rail, and he was looking at the optic with the slightly perplexed expression of a man who had been handed a kitchen appliance he had no use for. "You good, sir?" Bryce asked. Raymond looked up at him, and his eyes were the colour of wet slate, and they did not blink. "I'd like to remove this, if that's all right with you." He pointed at the red dot. Bryce laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, not exactly. It was the laugh of a young man who has never been wrong about anything important. "Sir, we run optics on this course. The whole curriculum is built around them. Irons are back up at best these days." Raymond nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he has already decided something and is just waiting for the other person to catch up. "Son, I appreciate that, but I've never put a red dot on a rifle in my life, and I don't think today is the day I start. If it's the same to you, I'll shoot the irons." Bryce glanced down the line. Several students were watching now. A GoPro clipped to a nearby tripod was recording. He felt the math of the situation assemble itself in his head. The cameras, the students, the YouTube channel, the chance to make a teaching moment out of this. And he made a decision that he would, 11 minutes later, begin to regret for the rest of his professional life. "Tell you what, sir, I'll pull the optic off myself. You shoot iron sights, and then after you finish, I'll walk the whole class through why we don't teach it that way anymore." He said it loud, projecting to the line, making sure everybody heard. "Because respectfully, and I mean that, sir, I do, what you're about to demonstrate is exactly what the modern battlefield left behind about 20 years ago. Optics aren't a luxury anymore, they're mandatory. Iron sights are a relic, a museum piece." A couple of the younger students chuckled. One of them, a stockbroker from Houston with a chest rig he had bought the week before, actually said out loud, "This is going to be brutal." Tyler Kessler, standing one firing position over from his grandfather, went very pale. He started to step forward, started to say something. He knew things about his grandfather that nobody on that firing line knew, had pieced them together over 19 years from overheard phone calls and yellowed photographs and the things Grandma Margaret used to say when she thought nobody was listening. But before Tyler could open his mouth, Raymond reached over and put one weathered hand on his grandson's forearm, just for a second. Just enough pressure to say no. And Tyler, who had been raised by this man as much as by his own father, understood the message and stepped back. Bryce unclamped the red dot and set it on the bench with a small showman's flourish. Raymond picked up the rifle, checked the chamber again, checked the magazine seating, and brought the weapon up to his shoulder in a single smooth motion that seemed to start somewhere in his boots and travel upward through his body like water finding its level. The flannel shirt hid what the motion revealed, that the old man's bone structure, once you stripped away the years, was still the bone structure of a combat marine. He settled. He breathed. And for the first time since he had walked onto the range, every student on the line stopped talking. There is a thing that happens sometimes on a firing line, a thing that experienced shooters know and inexperienced shooters do not, where the quality of the silence changes right before somebody does something remarkable. It is not a sound. It is the absence of a sound. The small fidgeting noises of unconfident hands suddenly going still, the scuff of boots on concrete ceasing, the ambient throat clearing evaporating all at once as if somebody had turned a dial. That silence settled over the firing line now, and Bryce Halloran felt it settle, and for the first time that morning a small cold finger of doubt traced its way up the back of his neck. He pushed the feeling down. He was a professional. He had seen old guys miss steel at 50 yards before. He had seen old guys put the rifle down halfway through the drill because their shoulders couldn't hack it anymore. That was the thing nobody talked about. Getting old took things from you, and no amount of wanting them back would give them back. And it was not unkind to point that out. It was honest. He was honest. That was his brand. He lifted the bullhorn. "Stand by." Raymond's body did not move. Shooter ready. A small nod. 10 rounds, 50 yards, steel plate, on the beep, 30 seconds on the clock, stand by. The timer chirped, and the 40 seconds that followed were not 40 seconds, they were 10 seconds. Because Raymond Kessler put 10 rounds into that 12-inch steel plate in 9.8 seconds, by the GoPro's timestamp, standing unsupported, breathing through his nose, the muzzle barely rising between shots, each impact ringing the steel with the same clean, identical note, like somebody striking the same bell 10 times in a row. When the bolt locked back, he lowered the rifle, ejected the magazine, laid the weapon flat on the bench with the ejection port facing up and the safety visibly engaged, and stepped back with his hands at his sides. He did not smile. He did not look at Bryce. He did not look at the other students. He looked at the steel plate, and the steel plate was still swinging, and the silence on that firing line was now a different kind of silence altogether. What nobody on that line knew yet, not Bryce, not the students, not Tyler standing one position over with tears already starting in his eyes for a reason even he did not fully understand, was that 300 miles away in San Antonio, a man in a pressed uniform had just received a phone call from a woman who had recognized a name on a course roster, and that man had stopped what he was doing, set down his coffee, and walked out of his office without telling anyone where he was going. Bryce tried to recover. That was the thing you had to give him credit for later, when the whole story got told and retold. He did try. He lowered the bullhorn and forced a grin onto his face and said, all right, nice shooting, sir. That's a good warm-up. Let's see what happens when we stretch the distance out and add some pressure, because a controlled pace at 50 yards is one thing but the modern gunfight." And Raymond, without turning his head, without raising his voice, said one sentence, "Son, why don't you pick the distance and I'll pick the pace?" The line went dead quiet again. Somebody in the back actually whistled, low and under their breath, the way men whistle when they have just watched one boxer land a clean hook on another. Bryce's grin stayed on his face, but the muscles underneath it had gone rigid. He was a young man, and he was a proud young man, and he had built his entire adult identity on being the most competent person in the room, and now he was being offered a choice. Back down in front of his students and his cameras, or escalate into a contest with a 78-year-old man in a flannel shirt, whose 10 rounds at 50 yards had just sounded like a metronome. He escalated. 200 yards, 30 rounds, silhouette target, you call your own pace, let's see it. He said it louder than he needed to. He said it for the cameras. Raymond nodded once. Fair enough. They drove down to the 200-yard line on a utility cart. Raymond and Bryce and Tyler and one of the assistant instructors, and none of them spoke. The silhouette target was a standard EDPA-style cardboard on a wooden frame. Fresh, unmarked, the afternoon sun coming in at a slight angle from the southwest. Raymond stepped off the cart, took the 3 30-round magazines the assistant handed him, and loaded them one at a time, pressing each round home with his thumb, with the unhurried economy of a man who had loaded, by rough count across his lifetime, somewhere north of 200,000 rounds of 5.56 ammunition. He seated the first magazine in the rifle. He chambered a round. He tucked the other 2 magazines into the front pocket of his flannel shirt. Behind him, the 18 students and Bryce and the 2 assistant instructors had formed a loose semicircle. Tyler was standing directly behind his grandfather now, arms crossed tight against his chest, and his face was doing something complicated. The thing happening on that firing line at that moment was not a shooting drill anymore. It was something else. It was the thing that happens in old stories, the thing that happens when a traveller turns out to be a king, the thing that happens when the stone rolls away from the well and the sword comes out clean. Bryce felt it too. He did not have a name for what he was feeling, but he felt it, and he had stopped talking. He simply raised the bullhorn and said, "Whenever you're ready, sir." Raymond brought the rifle up, and for the second time that morning, his body did that small miraculous thing where the years seemed to fall away from him. What happened in the next 43 seconds would be replayed on the GoPro footage 137 times over the following 6 months, by instructors at 3 different training facilities, trying to figure out exactly how he did it. But the short version is this. Raymond Kessler put 30 rounds of 5.56 NATO into the chest of that silhouette at 200 yards, standing unsupported, using iron sights, reloading twice from the shirt pocket, and every single one of those 30 holes could have been covered by a standard dinner plate. Not a platter, a plate. He finished the 3rd magazine, locked the bolt back, laid the rifle down the same way he had laid it down before, and stepped back with his hands at his sides. And this time, when he looked up, he looked directly at Bryce Halloran. And Bryce Halloran, 25 years old and 211,000 subscribers deep, opened his mouth to say something, and discovered that there was absolutely nothing in his head to say. The assistant instructor who walked down to pull the target came back holding it the way a man holds something breakable. He did not say anything. He simply held the target up so the students could see it. 30 holes, centre mass, the sun coming through them in 30 small, perfect circles of afternoon light. One of the students, a middle-aged man from Dallas who had served 4 years in the National Guard 20 years earlier and had not shot a rifle since, took his hat off. He did not do it as a gesture. He did it the way men used to do it automatically when something passed that required it. A couple of the other students saw him do it and did the same. Bryce did not take his hat off. Bryce was staring at Raymond and his jaw was working, and the thing in his face was the thing that happens to a young man the first time he realizes, down in the marrow of him, that there are dimensions of competence he has not yet begun to map. He finally got a sentence out. It came out smaller than he meant it to. "Sir, where did you learn to shoot like that?" Raymond Kessler looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked past him, out over the range, out towards something Bryce could not see and would never see, and he said very quietly, "A long time ago, in a country that isn't there anymore, from men who aren't here anymore." And that was all he said. He walked over to his grandson and put a hand on Tyler's shoulder and squeezed once, hard, and Tyler nodded and wiped his face with the back of his wrist, and the two of them started walking back toward the utility cart. They got about 15 feet before the first vehicle came up the access road. It was a black Chevrolet Tahoe with government plates, and it was moving faster than anyone usually moved on that dirt road, kicking up a long red plume behind it. It pulled into the parking lot and stopped diagonally across 2 spaces. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was in his early 60s. He was wearing Marine Corps dress blues with the sleeves full of decorations and 3 stars on each collar. His name tape read Tall Man. He was the commanding general of Marine Forces Reserve, and he had driven himself from San Antonio, no aide, no driver, no escort, after receiving a phone call from a retired civilian employee at Headquarters Marine Corps who had been going through a quarterly report of named civilian training attendees and had seen a name she had not seen in 48 years. Lieutenant General Marcus Tallman walked across the parking lot and onto the range, and the students saw him coming and parted without being asked. He did not look at any of them. He did not look at Bryce, who was standing frozen with the bullhorn still in his hand. He walked directly to Raymond Kessler, who had stopped with his hand still on Tyler's shoulder, and he stopped 3 feet in front of the old man and came to attention so hard his heels cracked together on the concrete. He did not salute yet. He was not in a position to salute yet. He simply stood there, 3 stars on his collar, and his voice came out rough. "Gunny, my God, it's been a long time." Raymond Kessler looked at him, and for the first time that entire morning, something moved behind the old man's eyes that had not moved in years. "Hello, Marcus." And Lieutenant General Marcus Tallman, 3-star general, 58,000 Marines under his command, said the next sentence with his voice cracking. "Sir, in November of 1968, you carried me 9 kilometers on your back with a sucking chest wound and 2 broken legs. I was 19 years old. You were 21. I've been trying to find a way to thank you properly for 57 years, and I would like, if you will permit me, to do that now." The silence on that range was the loudest silence any of those students had ever heard. Somewhere behind Bryce, the stockbroker from Houston said the word "oh" very quietly, the way a man says it when something is happening that he does not have the equipment to process. Tallman finally raised his hand in salute. He held it. Raymond Kessler, 78 years old, retired gunnery sergeant, United States Marine Corps, returned the salute with a hand that did not shake. Tallman dropped his hand first, as protocol demanded, because a general always drops first when saluting an enlisted man who has earned the right to be saluted. And there are very few men in the Marine Corps who have earned the right to be saluted by a general. But Raymond Kessler was one of them, and Marcus Tallman knew it. And now, for the first time, everyone else on that range was about to know it too. Tallman turned halfway, so he was addressing the students as well as Raymond. "My name is Marcus Tallman. I am the commanding general of Marine Forces Reserve. I have been a Marine for 40 years, and standing in front of you is the man who taught me how to shoot a rifle. He taught me that in the summer of 1968 at a firebase whose name isn't on most maps, and he taught me by doing it, and by making me do it, and by telling me, I remember this exactly, that a rifle was a promise you made to the man on your left and the man on your right, and you kept that promise by putting every round where it needed to go, every time, whether the sun was up or the sun was down, or you were bleeding or you were scared or you were so tired you couldn't feel your hands. He stopped. He breathed. He kept going. Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Kessler holds the Navy Cross. He holds the Silver Star. He holds 3 bronze stars with V devices, 2 Purple Hearts, and a combat action ribbon with 3 stars. He was meritoriously promoted 3 times. He declined a commission 4 times. He retired in 1987 after 22 years of service. And I would bet every dollar in my retirement account that he has not told any one of you any of this, because he has never in his life told anyone any of this unless they were standing in front of him in a uniform and needed to hear it. He turned back to Raymond. "Sir, I'm sorry I took so long to find you." Raymond Kessler, who had not cried in public since 1974, reached up and pressed his hand flat against his chest, against the shape of Margaret's ring under his undershirt, and he nodded once, and that was the only answer he gave. Bryce Halloran was still holding the bullhorn. The bullhorn felt very heavy. He was looking at the old man in the flannel shirt, and he was looking at the 3-star general, and he was running a ledger in his head. He was running every sentence he had said on that firing line that morning. He was running the phrase museum piece, and he was running the phrase relic, and he was running the sentence about the modern battlefield, leaving iron sights behind 20 years ago. And he was watching the commanding general of Marine Forces Reserve, a man who commanded 58,000 Marines, standing in front of the person he had just publicly mocked, and he was understanding in a single compressed instant that the person he had mocked was a living piece of the specific institutional memory that Bryce Halloran had built his entire career on pretending to possess. The instructors he had learned from men. Those men had learned from other men, and if you kept walking that chain backward, link by link, far enough, you did not end up in a classroom. You ended up in a jungle. You ended up at a firebase without a name. You ended up standing next to a 21-year-old Marine with iron sights on a rifle, putting every round where it needed to go, every time. Bryce lowered the bullhorn. He walked forward. He stopped in front of Raymond Kessler, and he took off his ball cap and he held it against his stomach with both hands the way his grandfather had taught him to hold a hat when a hearse went past. "Sir," he said. His voice was not steady. "I owe you an apology. In front of these men. In front of the cameras. In front of everybody. I was wrong, and I was disrespectful, and I was ignorant, and I am sorry." Raymond Kessler looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something that nobody on that range expected. He reached out and put his hand on Bryce Halloran's shoulder, the same way he had put it on Tyler's, and he squeezed once hard, and he said, "Son, you're a good shooter. You're a good teacher. You just hadn't met the right old man yet. That's all." And then, because Raymond Kessler had been raised by a Baptist mother in East Texas who had believed in mercy as a practical discipline, he added, "It's all right. Let's finish the class." And the class finished. Tyler Kessler shipped out to Parris Island 39 days later, and the first letter he sent home was to his grandfather, and it was 3 pages long, and the last sentence of it read, "I finally understand what you were trying not to tell me, and I love you, and I am going to be worthy of the name." Raymond kept that letter in the breast pocket of his flannel shirt for the rest of the winter, and on some evenings he would take it out at the kitchen table and unfold it and read it, and then he would fold it back up and put it away, and press his hand flat against his chest and feel the shape of Margaret's ring under the fabric. Tyler graduated at the top of his platoon. General Tallman came to the graduation. So did Raymond. There is a photograph from that afternoon, taken by Tyler's mother on her phone, of 3 generations of something that does not have a clean name. A 3-star general in dress blues, a 78-year-old retired gunny in a sport coat with a Marine Corps tie, and a 19-year-old private first class with a high and tight haircut, and the new uniform and the eyes that had already started to change. And the 3 of them are standing on a parade deck, and they are not smiling exactly, but something in all 3 of their faces is the same thing. And that thing is the thing that was passed down that afternoon on a dusty firing line east of Austin. The thing Raymond Kessler's voice had pointed at when he said "from men who aren't here anymore." Bryce Halloran closed his YouTube channel 3 weeks after that Saturday. Not forever, just for 6 months. He took the GoPro footage from the range that day, with Raymond's permission, and he edited a 41-minute video called The Gunny and the Iron Sights, and when he relaunched his channel that spring, that was the first thing he posted. The video currently has 19 million views. In the comments section, pinned at the top, there is a message from Bryce himself. It reads, "I built my whole career on being the smartest guy on the range. One Saturday last fall, a 78-year-old man in a flannel shirt taught me the difference between being smart and being humble, between knowing things and having earned them. His name is Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Kessler, United States Marine Corps, retired. If you leave a comment on this video, leave it for him." Below that comment there are 407,000 replies, and most of them contain a single word, repeated the way a drumbeat is repeated, the way a promise is repeated, the way men on the left and the right of you repeat the thing that keeps them alive. That word is honor. Raymond Kessler does not own a computer and has never seen the video. But every Sunday at 6 o'clock, his daughter Linda calls him on the landline, and sometimes, when the conversation is almost over, she reads him a few of the comments out loud. He sits at the kitchen table while she reads. He drinks his black coffee. He presses his hand flat against his chest, and when she's done, he says, "Thank you, Linda," and he hangs up the phone, and he sits there in the quiet of his little ranch house in Bastrop County with the evening coming down outside the window, and he does not say anything for a long time. Because the men he is thinking about cannot hear the comments. But he can, and that, in the end, is what all of it was for. If this story moved you, if you believe that the old men in flannel shirts sitting quietly in the back of the room deserve a second look before you decide who they are, subscribe to this channel, because every story we tell here is for them. The ones who came home and never said a word about it. The ones who carried somebody 9 kilometers on their back and then carried the silence for 57 years afterward. Type the word honor one more time in the comments. Let them know we see them. Let them know we remember.